Now I would like to introduce our next keynote speaker, Linas Tatarunas. He will speak on anti-Zionism actions and restriction of Jewish immigration. Mr. Tatarunas is a researcher on Jewish history, author on a number of articles on the Jewish problems in Soviet Lithuania. He has published publication on Jewish in Lithuania in Soviet times, on the problem of Jews, Soviet problem of Jews, as well as on the Jews living in the village of Kupiškis, a publication that was prepared in cooperation with the Center for Research into Jews. Mr. Tatarunas is also associate professor at Vilnius College. The floor is yours. Thank you. First of all, speaking about Zionism in Lithuania, we should first of all determine what the term refers to. First of all, it is very important to determine how we understand this concept and how do we use this concept now. To Lithuanians, as to other nations of the Soviet times as well, had different definitions of Zionism, and the concept itself was understood in a different way compared to the way it is understood right now. In the Soviet Union, as well as in the Soviet Lithuania, a very narrow-minded definition of Zionism was presented to the society. It was considered to be an ideology of Israel that expresses the interests of it. And every honest and decent Soviet person, citizen, had to fight with this ideology. Similar cliches are also promoted in present-day publications, even countries. You can only be sad about the fact that there are such persons in our country right now as well. In the present-day world, of course, there's a different definition of Zionism. In popular encyclopedias, international publications, Zionism is considered to be a national Jewish ideology, whereby the Jews attempted to create their own state in Palestine. I'm also inclined towards basing Zionism on this understanding, where it is considered to be a national movement whereby Jews want to create their own states, have their own national states, their own language. In Lithuania, the understanding of Zionism was similar to other national movements. It can be noted that this national Jewish movement, in its attempt to strengthen national language, to restore national state, was also similar to Lithuanian national movement that started in the beginning of the 19th century. As you may know, at the end of the 19th century, the Lithuanian national movement also gave beginning to the independence of Lithuania in 1918. At the same time, Theodor Herzl and others were also the ones who inspired the national movement of the Jews, who encouraged Jews to come back from diaspora. It should be noted that speaking about Zionism in Lithuania and the Zionism movement in Lithuania, despite the genocide, despite the Soviet period, Lithuanian Jews managed to preserve their identity, and once they were opportunities opened themselves to them, the Jews managed to pursue to create their state. Unfortunately, we have to recognize that thanks to some of our Lithuanians, half of the Lithuanian Jews failed to reach their state. The sudden Soviet attack against Germany, the first years of the sudden attack of Soviet attack of Germany had certain results on the Zionism movement in Lithuania. Several groups of people, several groups of activists could be distinguished in that period, one of which referred to young people who, thanks to their mobility, thanks to their determination and endurance, managed to flee into the depths of the USSR. The next group could be considered those people having communist viewpoints who participated in the occupational regime administration activities. They also retracted into the USSR, the depths of the USSR. The third group could consider the ghetto martyrs, basically Zionists, Buddhists, Bundists, Yiddishists, all of those who left the ghettos in 1943 and joined the Soviet partisan movement. Another group yet were the people who were taken away to the concentration camps and who managed to survive. And yet another group were the people, the Jews, who were saved by the righteous among the nations. In 1944, the Jews that retreated into the depths of the Soviet Union before the war came back into Lithuania. It also included the prisoners of the ghetto and the soldiers of the 16th Division, Lithuanian Division, who came back together with the Red Army, as well as ghetto fighters who were fighting in the Soviet partisan forces. In Lithuania, when they came back, they saw that what was left from once a great Jewish civilization were only the remains, the ruins. The Jewish cultural heritage was destroyed, Jewish property was also destroyed. It was nationalized by the Soviets. Later on, they were looted by the Germans, by local collaborants. And in the end, it was nearly all destroyed. The partisan resistance in the first Soviet occupation times also took place. And at the same time, for the Jews, Lithuanian Jews who came back into Lithuania, they wanted to live in the so-called shtetls or Jewish communities, and they did not have such opportunities. Lithuanian Jews who suffered Holocaust started gathering in large Lithuanian cities, basically Kaunas and Vilnius. A lot of Jews also decided to leave the country, which was turned into a cemetery of their parents and grandparents. Among the first organizers of Zionist movement were the Kaunas and Vilnius ghetto prisoners. Former ghetto prisoners, back in 1944, started organizing Zionist underground movements and organized the Jewish emigration from Lithuania. Abu Kovner was among the first to leave for Poland. He was among the first Zionist movement pioneers, who was in charge of the organization of the remaining Lithuanian Jews' transfer into Poland and then to Palestine. In Poland, in Lodz, there was also a very active Zionist organization movement who was also organizing the transfer of the Jews that were living in the USSR into Poland and then further on to Palestine.
Su specialia misija į Sovietų Sąjungos Vidurinės Azijos miestus buvo pasiųsti konkretūs žydų tautinio judėjimo aktyvistai, kurie turėjo agituoti.
Jewish national activists were also sent into the Soviet Union to activate Jews to emigrate from the Soviet Union. They also organized the emigration of Jews from the western parts of the Soviet Union, which in 1944 they announced an operation called the Escape, the purpose of which was to have as much Jewish people to leave the Soviet Union. Speaking about Jewish emigration from Lithuania and Soviet attempts to prevent it, the second half of 1944 until December 1945, those Jews who were willing to leave the country, they made every effort to leave the country, which turned into a cemetery of the Jewish nation. In 1944-1945, the Jewish runaways managed to cross the border very easily. Those Jews who came back from concentration camps, from hard labor camps to Lithuania, and those who wanted to leave Lithuania, they managed to disappear among those who came back to Lithuania. Later on, the Jews managed to leave the country hiding in lorries with the help of smugglers. The Zionist movement was characteristic of organizing illegal border crossings for huge sums of money. Another period of Jewish emigration was marked by an attempt to emigrate and leave the country with the help of Lithuanian fishermen. At that time, Jews also tried to leave Lithuania into Poland and then through Czechoslovakia into Germany. For those who in the groups of Jews who wanted to leave the country, secret agents were infiltrated in them. In one of these groups that was arrested in 1944, Šaulis Pavlas Beilevson was also a very active activist of Zionist movement, was also arrested in an attempt to leave the country. Many of them, of those who were arrested, were taken away into hard labor camps and imprisoned. The third phase of Zionist movement started in the spring of 1946 and lasted until 1949. In that period, Zionists willing to leave the Soviet Union used the Polish third repatriation phase. Lithuanian Jews tried to acquire documents that could legalize their Polish identity, and meanwhile they could escape in legal way the country. Many Jews left this way. They also left the country with the help of fictitious marriages, having the identity of having a Polish identity. Using these methods, as much as 100,000 Jews managed to leave for Poland in 1944-1946. Speaking about the Jewish immigration in the period between 1944 up to 1949, first of all, we should focus on the fact that the motivation of Jews who were emigrating from Lithuania was rather different from those who were emigrating from the Tsarist Russia. Like I said, first of all, they were motivated by the sad experience of the Holocaust. Speaking about the Zionist movement in Lithuania, we must remember that the emigration of the Jews was also influenced by the creation of the State of Israel in the 1940s. And after the Holocaust, the international community realized that Jews also have the right to have their own state. Ir tai padėjo pamatus Lietuvos bei viso pasaulio sionistų svajoniai turėti tautinę valstybę. 48 metų gegužės 14 dieną in 1948, the Israel announced its declaration of independence. It was one of the major reasons which determined Zionist movement tendencies in Lithuania. Violence against Jews, such as exile, such as Holocaust, were also among the reasons which determined the viewpoints with regard to Lithuanian Jews and their emigration. It was expected that in the 1940s, the Soviets thought that Jews will, having established their state, will start cooperating and working with Soviet tendencies. Unfortunately, Israel oriented its activities towards the West, contrary to the Soviet expectations. Nevertheless, speaking about the situation in Lithuania, differently from larger cities, larger Soviet cities, in Lithuania there weren't great manifestations of anti-Semitism. Of course, we can be sure of Zionist activities and certain anti-Semitic manifestations were also present in Soviet publications. Such manifestations were present in Soviet articles such as Pravda Daily, published in Moscow. The Jewish Zionist movement in Lithuania felt a period of thaw after the 20th Congress of the Communist Party Central Committee in 1956, when part of the repressed people were released from hard labor camps who came back to Lithuania. At the end of 1960s, 1970s, Zionist organizations held Jewish celebrations. They kept speaking about the attempts to maintain cultural tendencies. In that period, there were new possibilities to discuss Jewish rights. It was possible to listen to radio broadcasts from the Israel radio. In 1960s, a new new phase in the Zionist movement started, during which a number of Lithuanian Jews also managed to emigrate. Many Jews wanted to establish contacts with their relatives living abroad. Jewish organizations in the West, meanwhile, gave support to the Lithuanian Jews, and as of 1967, when there were actual possibilities to emigrate from the Soviet Union, they sent money to all of those who were willing to leave the country. After the strict immigration policy was softened in 1970s, the true Zionists left at that time. This was the period, the final period of Zionist movement activism.
Su kuriuo sovietinės administracinės bei saugumo struktūros kovojo keldamos tradicinį kovos prieš sionizmo lozungą.
The Soviet administration
su tikruoju sionizmu turėjęs ne tiek jau daug ir bendro. Lietuvoje 8-metyje buvo susiformavę ir veikė du už emigraciją pasisakę žydų judėjimai.
In 1990s, there were two movements that were in favor of the emigration of the Jews.
Taip pat į Sovietų Sąjungos žydų disidentų judėjimą ir jų emigraciją iš Lietuvos 72-76 metais. Taip pat truputį vėliau 82-85 metais. Kuomet per Lietuvą iš Sovietų Sąjungos išvyko nemažai kitų sovietinių respublikų žydų. Pagrindė mokslinio techninio personalo.
1980s marked the period when Jews, scientists, Jews, experts, representatives of the scientific world also left the country. Meanwhile, Lithuania became a transit country for dissident Jews.
Tai, kad skirtingai nuo Rusijos, emigruoti siekiantys žydai nebuvo laikomi priešais ir išdavikais, sudarė žydų disidentams geras sąlygas laukiant vizų Izraelį išdavimo.
Because Lithuania was a transit country because it was always characterized by much more tolerance than Russia did, and they had better conditions here to prepare for their emigration. Israel was the destination of emigration, but it was not as important to Russian Jews. Lithuanian Jews really did want to go to Israel. Russian Jews did not experience any pain because of the Holocaust, because they didn't experience it, and therefore Russian Jews tried to settle in Lithuania. And then, of course, the Security Committee of the Soviet Union tried to act against the Jews that were Zionists, and therefore there were some periods within the Soviet Union period that the Jews were allowed to leave the Soviet Union. But the aim there, the aim pursued by the Soviet Union was very different, because they wanted to have different groups of Jews fighting among themselves, having disputes, and they very often alleged that the Jews that came to settle to Lithuania were those that had only one aim: to leave the Soviet Union, and very often they were labeled as Zionists. The KGB, of course, fought against Jewry, and several ways can be mentioned, and that is undercover from KGB in Jewish groups, in Jewish communities, as well as local Jewish communities being reported on, and of course there were other claims too.